Are you ready for a time-traveling thrill ride? Here are 19 reasons to watch the 11/22/63 miniseries. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dave Musson, at Dave Musson on Instagram. This is the place where I talk to you about all things Stephen King, and we are back on the paths of the adaptations, the movies, the miniseries. We're talking about a miniseries in particular, this one, the 2016 adaptation of 11/22/63, the fantastic 2011 novel. Loads to talk about here, loads to get excited about. We're going to do that right after a couple of quick plugs. Okay, some things I want to plug. My range of Stephen King themed band shirts, like my Metallica Tommy Knockers crossover here. You can find the link in the description. You can also find the link to my collection of short stories, Once More Around the Sun, won some awards last year, very nice. And lastly, if you like what I'm doing on this channel, you can become a member. You can become a constant viewer, you get access to members only content, early access to regular videos, and some cool emojis too. And you get to support me. So if any of that sounds interesting, check it out, all in the description. Okay then, so we are, as I mentioned, back on the adaptations, and we're entering an era of peak Stephen King adaptations. Starting off with this one from 2016, the 11/22/63 miniseries, which was produced by J.J. Abrams, starred James Franco and Sarah Gadon. This one is great. It's a great novel. It's a great series. I'm excited to talk to you about it. Now, if you're worried about spoilers, if you haven't seen this series, don't worry. Anything that I say in this that might ruin a first-time watch will be hidden behind a spoiler alert, so you can just use the timestamp in the description to skip ahead to the outro and skip that. But otherwise, just watch the whole thing and have some fun with it. Now, if you want to watch this mini-series, you can find it in a couple of different places. If you're in the US, you can find it on Tubi, and if you're in the UK, at the time of recording, you can find it on Prime. Okay, enough preamble, let's go down the rabbit hole. Here are 19 reasons to watch 11/22/63. So what's my headline reason to watch this? Well, it's just so good. As I mentioned, it's the start of an era of peak Stephen King adaptations. And with this one, you can just feel the quality throughout. You can feel the care, the passion, there's patience with it. There's a proper ending to it as well. It's just excellent all round, and it's a fitting adaptation of a superb book. So this series was in demand even before the book came out. There was a feature film first announced in August 2011, just before the book came out, then that fell away, and it came back as a series, eventually picking up a bit more steam from 2014 onwards. And that faith is justified. It's a really, really good product we have here. Now, I particularly like how much of this we actually get. We get 8 episodes, and they're roughly about an hour each. Actually, most of them are a bit less than an hour, but it gives us the right amount of the book. We get to do enough of the story, and the series gets to do it justice. And as I mentioned already, it has a proper ending. This series is confident and comfortable enough being a standalone one-hit thing. It doesn't just try and stretch the IP for seasons and seasons and seasons afterwards. It knows what it is, it does what it needs to do, and then it walks away when it's done. And I praise it wholeheartedly for that. So what's the hook here? Well, it's the same as the book. Our lead character, Jake, is shown by a friend a little rabbit hole where he can go back in time, and his friend tasks him with stopping the Kennedy assassination because his friend is convinced that that will make the world a better place. And Jake eventually decides to take up that challenge. He has to go back through the rabbit hole, which drops him at a particular date and time, so he has a few years to kill in the past, and he tries to work out if he can go and stop Kennedy being assassinated. But the past doesn't like being messed with and isn't afraid to push back. And that's where we see some of the more interesting parts of this story. So let's talk about the cast. We should probably start with James Franco, who plays our lead, Jake Epping/Jake Amberson. Now, I mean, for many reasons, it's a real shame that James Franco turned out to be a sex pest. Although by the looks of it, he is getting treatment and is in recovery, so hopefully that's a good thing. But it really does feel like his behaviour and the timing of this coming out has really meant that people don't talk about this series as much. And for all that he did wrong, and it was very wrong, his performance in this is excellent. He's really good. He's really likeable as Jake. And he clearly had a thing for this particular book. He tried to get the rights to it right when he first read it, and was really disappointed to discover that J.J. Abrams had got the rights, and he was tweeting about it. wrote an article about it in Vice magazine. Eventually, that all found its way to the producer of this series, and he basically got what he wanted, I guess, in some ways, and ended up being a lead, which actually, thinking about it, kind of sounds quite similar to some of the behaviours he was exhibiting, so maybe not such a good thing to celebrate. He also does the audiobook for this as well. But purely analysing his artistic performance, he is great. Just a shame he's a bit of a shitbag outside of that, really. Anyway, back onto the rest of the cast. Sarah Gadon as Sadie. I don't know if I pronounced her surname correctly, actually. She's perfect. She's beautiful. She's charming. She just floats in. She does exactly what she needs to do. She's a dream. Now, I really like Daniel Webber as Lee Harvey Oswald. I thought his performance was very good, and we see him transform from a angry, frustrated activist to what he ends up trying to do in terms of being someone who's going to take down the president. And I think his transformation feels very real. His performance is gripping throughout, and I really like him. And someone else I want to mention is a new character we get for the series. So we get this character called Bill, who Jake meets early on, and is kind of there to, I guess, help Jake out with a bunch of stuff and also take it a bit out of Jake's head. And it kind of works. I wasn't convinced at first, but actually, mainly through the performance of George Mackay, he really drew me in and really won me over on that character. And him and Jake together, they work well. Yeah, it just works. Also with Bill, he's something of a loose cannon, and when you combine that with the past pushing back, it gives you a bit of tension, a bit of jeopardy throughout this series that is really useful. Okay, the spoiler alert is coming earlier than usual in this video because I want to go through each episode and talk about each one. So consider this your spoiler alert. And if you want to bail at this point, then just use the timestamp to head out to the outro and I'll see you there. Otherwise, stick around because I've got a few more reasons for you to watch 11/22/63 coming right up. So episode 1 is the longest, but it's an absolute joy to watch, and you are immediately comforted by the quality of this thing right away. This is where we see Jake go back in time for the first time, and that moment where he hits 1960 America, like the nostalgia is so vivid. It's like that moment in Back to the Future where Marty goes back to the 50s for the first time. It's just a joy, and it really sets you up for the rest of the series. So episode 2 focuses on Frank Dunning, who is the man who would go on to kill basically everyone in his family apart from one of his sons, who would then go on to be the janitor at Jake's school in the 2010s and would write a very harrowing story about it. And Jake decides to stop Frank Dunning from committing those atrocities. And this episode is so dark. Like in the book, I don't remember quite getting into the head of Frank Dunning quite this much, but he is a really, really nasty, nasty person. And this episode just makes your skin crawl with how nasty it is. Yeah. Episode 3 is a real beaut. This is the one where Jake arrives in Jody in Texas, sets up home for himself, gets himself a job at the school, and meets Sadie properly for the first time and ends up chaperoning the dance with her. And we get this super rose-tinted, saccharine, sugar-sweet dance scene that really shouldn't work, but really does. And it captures the heart and the romance of the story beautifully. So episode 4 sees Jake and Sadie's romance up a notch or 2 or 3. And they also fail to notice a quite sinister looking red and white fury that seems to be following them round town. Now this one may be a little bit of a filler episode, but it is important for padding out the romance between those two main characters, so it's fine. So episode 5 is a very dark one. So first of all, we discover who's driving that red and white fury. It's Johnny Clayton, Sadie's ex-husband. And typically, on the same day that Jake is supposed to discover whether Lee Harvey Oswald tried to assassinate General Walker, Johnny takes Sarah hostage, viciously maims her, and threatens to kill both her and Jake. And we get a quite gruesome scene between the three of them, where Jake eventually is able to overpower Johnny and save the day, but at the cost of not actually knowing what happens because the past is pushing back on all fronts. It's one of those episodes where everything is just firing on all cylinders, and it is great. So episode 6 is the only one I didn't like. Definitely felt like a bit of a filler. We just get lots of stuff happening. So Bill starts a relationship with Lee Harvey Oswald's wife. We learn that Ms. Mimi has got cancer, and it's all just a bit ploddy and a bit bitty, except for the ending, which is great, where Jake's betting with all his future knowledge catches up on him, and he is left beaten to a pulp, basically. Episode 7 is very episodic, but it's an important one in terms of sort of cranking things up. So Jake is recovering from his attack. He's been left with insomnia. He's been left without any memory. Ironically, I've forgotten the word for that. Amnesia, that's it. And as 22nd of November 63 approaches, he slowly regains more memories of why he was there and what he's doing. It also spells the end for Bill, who sadly dies by suicide in this episode. But by the end, we're there on the day, on 11/22/63, and we're watching Lee Harvey Oswald set up his nest on the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository, and we're ready to see what happens. And then episode 8, what a great finale. So Jake manages to save JFK, but at the cost of losing Sadie. And he eventually is let go, goes back to Maine, goes back through the rabbit hole to see what he'd actually done. Turns out he didn't do a good thing. Not at all. But thankfully, because every time you go through the rabbit hole it resets, he's able to reset and bring Sadie back. And he considers trying to win her over again, but then decides to just let her go. And then we flash forward back to 2016, and he's curious as to what happened to Sadie. So he looks her up online and then goes and finds her for one last dance. So in terms of my favourite moments in this series, I had a lot, but my overall favourite was the scene that I mentioned earlier where Johnny Clayton is there holding Sadie hostage and Jake is trying to save as many of them as he can. It's really brutal, really dark, really satisfying as well. Just very excellently done. That's my favourite line. It's probably in the last episode where the FBI agent talks about not letting ballistics get in the way of the truth, which feels like a little nod to all of those conspiracy theories out there.
Oh, I'm not going to let a little thing like ballistics get in the way of the truth.
Okay, I'm going to grab my notes here because when it comes to links to other Stephen King adaptations in the cast and crew and Easter eggs, there were quite a few across this series. So let's see what I spotted. If I missed anything, let me know. But we've got Leon Rippey in this, who is also in Firestarter and Under the Dome. In one episode, we see Annette O'Toole, who was in the It miniseries, and we see Michael O'Neill, who was in Dreamcatcher. Then, on to Easter eggs. So Jake's car registration number was 95R32. 9532 equals 19. Jake claims to be JFK's #1 fan, like Annie Wilkes, of course, in Misery. John Clayton, as I mentioned earlier, basically drives Christine. Someone uses the phrase dirty little bird, like Annie Wilkes. In fact, that's Johnny Clayton, isn't it? Jake says he went to Bates High School, which is the name of Carrie's high school in the original Carrie movie. Nice little deep cut there. In the last episode, we see some graffiti in the stairwell of the book depository that says Red Rum, like in The Shining. And then in the alternative future, there's some graffiti that said Captain Trips, which is obviously from The Stand. And then there was a sign outside the diner saying, "Thanks for 35 wonderful years," which is similar to Life of Chuck, even though this came out before that story was written. But I know, it pinged in my brain, so I'm sharing it with you here. Finally, this series is brilliant, and it captures a wonderful book as well as I think it could have been captured. If you've never watched it, change that. Okay, there we go. Those are my 19 reasons to watch the 11/22/63 miniseries. If you watched this, let me know what you think of it. Let me know your favourite moments, all of that kind of stuff. And if you haven't watched it yet, has this convinced you to go and give it a try? I really think you should. So before we go, some other things you can do. You can become a member of this channel, become a constant viewer and support me directly and get access to exclusive content. You can pick up a range of Stephen King themed band shirts from my t-shirt store. There's linked in the description, including Metallica doing the Tommyknockers, and you can check out my collection of short stories, Once More Around the Sun. Won a few awards last year. People seem to like it. If you like Stephen King, which you probably do because you're on this channel, then you'll probably like my stories. And other than that, well, thanks for watching. we're in a good run of stuff now. So we've got another series coming up next, and it's another fun one. So we'll see you for that.